mono black deck. We sometimes see Reed Duke play this deck as well. We have four copies of Smallpox. This is a neat one. Bitter Blossom, Lingering Souls, Bloodghast, Nether Spirit, and Tomb. This is an old school black deck.
A lot of problematic enchantments in this deck. The Bitter Blossom is a 2 of. There's 3 copies of Contamination. That's an older one that viewers might not necessarily be familiar with. It's black and 2. It makes all lands just tap for black, and you have to sacrifice a creature at your upkeep. So options there are the Bloodghast. There's 3 Bloodghast, 1 Nether Spirit, and combos with Bitter Blossom as well.
So turn 1, Urborg. There's 3 copies of Urborg in the Pox deck, and Thoughtseize from Jay. Frank's going to do Force of Will, pitching Force of Will to counter it. Now, interestingly enough about this, these players, so Frank Skarren, part of Team Metagame Gurus. Jay Imperiale played the Team GP last weekend with Metagame Gurus captain Jim Davis. There's a very good chance, despite the fact he's on Pox, that these players know each other's lists and have play tested against each other before this event.
Right.
You might think it's strange, right? Urborg Thoughtseize, I'm going to force it. You'd be like, that's normally you don't do that play.
Right.
But
with Miracles, often enough, you'll protect against a Thoughtseize to set up a Sensei's Divining Top, just because it's so important to your strategy.
Turn 2, Mishra's Factory into Bloodghast. Jay able to cast it based off of that Urborg, giving him access to double black. He does go by Jay, not Jason. Just what I'm saying. Bloodghast, a recurring threat here. It's 3 of in Jay's deck.
This would be a good one to hit with a Swords to Plowshares.
Right, that's the problem, is that Frank's removal is Swords to Plowshares, Terminus, Council's Judgment. It's the exiling type. Actually doesn't have any kill spells that don't exile, so.
And Frank looks like he's actually going, I believe this is an end step Brainstorm because he has a Terminus in hand as his answer.
Okay, so just using it to set up a kill spell. Draws Council's Judgment as well. So plenty of ways to answer Bloodghast. A lot of ways Pox is a raw resource, almost prison deck. It's interesting. We'll see it play out here. See Terminus puts Bloodghast to the bottom of the deck.
The closest similarity, if you're a modern player, is going to be to 8-Rack.
Another mono black deck, yeah.
Right.
Sensei's Divining Top for Frank.
And it's the typical conversion from a modern deck to a legacy deck. There's more nonsense that costs 0 mana.
And you see Jay really wanted that Bloodghast too. There's a copy of Cabal Therapy in his hand, which that's really unfair with Bloodghast. Now he'll cast Liliana of the Veil. You see, using a fetch land to make black mana thanks to Urborg. There are some dead cards in the main here for Jay. His remaining cards in hand are a Cabal Therapy, a Smallpox, and a Innocent Blood. He's just going to discard Innocent Blood. No real play on that one against Miracles.
Yeah, not much in the way of creatures for the Miracle deck, not to mention that the Liliana of the Veil is just an Edict effect itself. So
and he's got a Smallpox in hand. Like, things about mono black decks is they don't have a problem killing creatures.
Yeah, the deck is naturally very redundant, and you kind of have to be when you're not a Brainstorm deck in Legacy.
Frank's going to spin top during upkeep here. He does have a Council's Judgment already in hand. If he can find the mana to cast it, then he'll have a clean way to take care of the Liliana. You see cast Brainstorm. I think one of the nice parts about Miracles in this match, or against Pox, is that mono black has a lot of powerful effects, but its threat density is actually pretty low. If you can trade with him, if Frank can make enough trades happen, Jay's going to start drawing Therapies, Innocent Bloods. There's going to be some pretty weak cards.
With Frank drawing Ponders and Brainstorms to find the specific things that he wants. Jay is playing some copies. He actually has a full 4 Sensei's Divining Top himself to kind of get around that.
I don't...
Actually, I apologize. That's just Frank's deck list.
Yeah.
They got switched.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways he makes card advantage is with those Bloodghasts. 4 copies of Entomb in his deck, and really he just entombs Bloodghasts off it.
Yeah, or sometimes in a pinch you get Cabal Therapy. Get that discard effect in your graveyard.
So Frank spun top there, cast Brainstorm. He really wanted to make the land drop, and he was able to off Brainstorm. Gets an island into play. Jay draws for turn. It's another copy of Liliana.
And with Frank having Sensei's Divining Top, he just needs to answer that Liliana before it becomes too problematic. I believe he's still off the second white source for the Council's Judgment.
Looks like he's going to Cabal Therapy here. Can he name something blind? If he gets, well, we'll see. There's only 2 cards in Frank's hand, and one of them is Brainstorm. It's really hard for Jay to actually get this to work.
Something that Jay's deck does have going for it in this matchup is he has a number of cards that are pretty strong against this counterbalance lock. The Bloodghasts, they always come back. Things like Lingering Souls. The Miracles deck's not super heavy on 3, so it can be difficult to actually counter that one with a counterbalance.
Jay named Swords to Plowshares. That's going to miss. And this Brainstorm's really powerful. So say Jay uses Factory to may turn it into a creature and flashback therapy, hoping to hit counterbalance, right? In response to it, Frank's probably going to hide the counterbalance with Brainstorm.
With the name of Swords to Plowshares, it's more indicative of Jay going for an attack with the Factory.
And it may not matter. You see a plus from Liliana. Frank's going to use Brainstorm here. With the Smallpox in Jay's hand and the Liliana activation, Frank will lose all his cards. That he'll get to draw the top of his deck, but we'll see. We'll say Council's Judgment on top. He gets to pick which ones he's drawing. Whatever he keeps in his hand is gone.
He found a Swords to Plowshares off of that, though if he's going down to 0 cards on this turn, it's going to be really hard to actually hit that Mistress Factory given the Liliana of the Veil.
I feel like there was a mind game that happened here. So Jay named Swords to Plowshares on the therapy, but Swords to Plowshares is terrible against his hand. And he got Frank to keep a Swords to Plowshares on top of his deck, which kind of feels like a win. And now Jay looks like he's going to cast that Smallpox. It's the last card in his hand. Might as well.
Skarren will still be playing with the Sensei's Divining Top. That can be used to combat that Liliana effect to some extent. It also gives him access to functionally more cards.
Yeah, interestingly enough, they're low enough on permanence that even a Liliana Ultimate's not horrible.
Right.
Eventually, he will find the land for the Council's Judgment. But Jay's going to go empty-handed. Here's Smallpox. Both players are going to lose all their cards. They're both going to sacrifice down to 2 lands. And Frank caught with counterbalance in his hand. That's a win for Jay. Looks like he's going to sacrifice. Looks like the Urborg keeps his fetch land.
And Frank sacrificing that Volcanic Island, that one's not going to matter in game 1 here.
He has 1 basic mountain as well, but yeah, all the red cards are in the sideboard. And upkeep, Frank will spin top, and does he find a land? That's the question. I don't believe so. It's Swords to Plowshares, Council's Judgment, Monastery Mentor. That's a horrible top 3, really. No matter what he keeps, Liliana is going to eat it.
Right. It's going to be very difficult to set up Monastery Mentor given the amount of resources that Frank currently has access to, and because Jay just has that Liliana hanging out.
Draws a card and says go. Now, fortunately for Frank, Jay does not have any closing speed yet. You know, he's just... He draws a swamp, plays it. Liliana goes up to 6. Frank gets to look 1 deeper with Divining Top. Or he'll float a white man. Yeah, he'll just spin top. Sees those pair of 3s and a Force of Will. Oh, no, nothing good so far.
No.
If Frank can find land 3 and play it, as soon as he does, then he'll be okay. He can start he can start casting these cards, but until he does, he's going to take 2 a turn. And interesting enough, okay, Frank spins top, puts Force of Will on top of his deck, draws a card off Divining Top, and then discards the Force of Will. And Mistress Factory swings in for 2. Frank drops to 15.
Yeah, he had found himself with that Swords to Plowshares in hand. He really didn't want to discard that, and using the top, he got the option to discard the worst of the top 3 cards in his deck.
Yeah, so he recasts the top that he knew was there. Another draw by Jay. Entomb. This one will most likely, he's got 3 Bloodghasts and 1 Nether Spirit.
3 Lingering Souls in the deck as well.
All right, that's something else he can get.
So he can use this Polluted Delta that he's been able to maintain on the battlefield here to go return Bloodghast to the battlefield.
Yeah, it's going to be Nether Spirit. So this is a 1 of in his deck.
And that one just comes back every turn. Remember, the Bloodghast earlier in the game was dealt with a Terminus.
Beginning of your upkeep, if Nether Spirit is the only creature card in your graveyard, you may return it to the battlefield. So right now that is true, it is. Liliana will plus. Frank's going to do the same trick, looks like, where he spins his top. He's got that Swords to Plowshare still in hand. It's free to spin the top. He doesn't have to do the same thing where he draws a card. Certainly a look at the top 3, though. Another Force of Will. So it's 3 uncastables on top of the deck still.
With the Force being the least castable.
So he's going to make the same play where he draws the Force of Will off Divining Top, puts top on his deck, discards Force of Will. These things are horrible at this point. And now Jay is going to activate the factory. He does have to spend his fetch land doing this, though. So it means if he gets a Bloodghast, that's -1 there.
Right.
Activate and swing. You see Scrubland was the get there. There are some white cards in Jay's deck. It is just 3 copies of Lingering Souls and 1 copy of Sorin, Lord of Innistrad.
And now with Liliana the Veil at 7 loyalty, if Jay wants, he can use that as a -6 Stone Rain.
Yeah. Nether Spirit comes into play. Now, Frank has played this game. I want to just compliment how this trick he's done with Divining Top every turn. It seemed like he was kind of just, you know, messing around with his cards and not accomplishing anything. But it does mean Nether Spirit's on the battlefield now, and Frank has a Swords to Plowshares in his hand. He has successfully done that. Cabal Therapy from Jay. Okay, Frank's not going to let that happen. He'll Swords away the Nether Spirit. And this may have been a misstep for Imperiale that that creature wasn't supposed to get exiled. Maybe not. Maybe didn't have a chance. I guess
it'd be pretty difficult to avoid.
Clear the way. Yeah, that would be hard to do. Liliana -6. Now, how do you split this? Do you go land top? If he goes land, top, and land.
Well, first you find out if Frank trades up his top in response.
Okay.
I like leaving the top with the basic island if it's still on the battlefield.
Okay, you don't go top versus lands. You want to make sure you get a land?
Yes, I imagine so. Getting the top would be nice, and I suppose Frank is down to nothing.
I guess if Frank's top 3 cards of the deck, no, Frank's going to draw off the top. If the top 3 cards of his deck are all uncastables, taking his Divining Top is pretty great. Right, so Frank draws a card on Divining Top, so Jay says, okay, separate your 2 lands. Frank says, I'll keep the Tundra. I'm interested they kept, I guess he has to keep the Tundra. He's got a double white card on top of his deck.
Yeah, and a single white card in his hand.
So now he has to draw Monastery Mentor. That one's going to get eaten by the Liliana again.
Right.
Keep in mind, this is a 4 Wasteland deck from Imperiale. Bitter Blossom is the play. That's a 2 of.
All right, now Frank's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Not that he wasn't before.
Yeah, and this is what we said where Pox is this prison deck. He's choking Frank off resources, and now Frank's top of the deck finally produces lands. It's basic Plains, basic Mountain, and that Council's Judgment. But it's almost a too little, too late thing here. Even if he finds Council's Judgment, the damage has been done, and there's going to be a lot of fairy tokens in play as well.
Right. It's both true that the Bitter Blossom rolled off the top, and there's also still that Mishra's Factory. Frank is down to 11.
Yeah. So, start making Fairy Rogues. A draw from Imperiale. Jay will activate Factory. No cards in hand for Skarren, so that attack will connect. Sends Skarren down to 9. A land from Jay, a plus of the Liliana, and we keep going. And one thing I like about Jay's deck, it's actually, you remember that counterbalance early on? Had Frank resolved countertop, I don't even know how good it is here. Jay's using creature lands and guys coming out of the graveyard, and it's medium.
This deck's choice, it's suggestive that Jay was expecting to play against a lot of miracles for exactly the reason that you're discussing here. He has a lot of stuff that's just pretty good against the counterbalance lock, and not to mention that his deck's relatively heavy on 3-mana spells, which are a little bit tougher for the Miracles deck to deal with in general. It's full of a lot of 1s and 2s. Here is that Council's Judgment. Frank activate at the top to draw a card so you can make a land drop and cast this on the same turn.
So Bitter Blossom gone. It's going to slow down the clock. It's still a 3-turn clock, though. 1 Fairy Rogue token happened.
And he still has the Liliana.
Right. There's a lot to deal with. You mentioned before, there's not that much card advantage in Legacy. You know, a lot of Frank's draws, like Council's Judgment, they're these 1-for-1s, which sure it can remove anything. It's pretty good, but.
And Sensei's Divining Top does a good impression of having card advantage because you have access to more cards. And realistically, without the top, Frank really wasn't in this game at all. He wouldn't have been able to block for that Swords to Plowshares for as long as he did. But yeah, you're exactly right. Coming back from this far behind is very difficult.
So Jay's going to try to close this one out. And yeah, it's a lot of times we look at Prison, when we think of Prison decks in Legacy, we think of decks like lands. But Pox, not horrible here. Looking to have a lot of game against Miracles. You see he drew a copy of Lingering Souls, which he will cast, making 2 Spirit tokens. Swings for 1 with the Fairy Rogue. Skarren's down to 8.
The Souls puts a little bit more pressure on Frank. Previously, he was able to set up top and Terminus. He could potentially deal with the Ferry and the Mistress Factory on the same turn. Now Jay is way more protected against that. And the top of Frank's deck's not looking terribly hot here. As he spins the top, it's Brainstorm, Counterbalance, Scalding Tarn. When you have top Brainstorm, you can get a little bit deeper. You get 1 card closer by using both effects. But he's a little bit choked on mana and behind by enough where it's going to be hard to make that matter.
So doing some maneuvers here to cycle through the top, cast it, draw it, play Brainstorm. Find some lands. He has counter top. The damage is done here. And he has to keep the land. And that's the pressure that Liliana's doing. Is Frank can't even really build a reserve of cards because Liliana takes 1 every turn. 5 damage on the table looks for Imperiale. Still has the Liliana.
His deck not in the market to win the game quickly. And
no, I mean it really is a Prison deck.
And he's very much executing in that regard.
Yeah, swing for 5. Frank's down to 3. And he'll cast Smallpox. Sure. He loses a creature, a land. This is an expensive Stone Rain here.
And it maintains the fact that his board was lethal because the Smallpox does make each player lose 1 life. So the Spirit tokens are still lethal, and it also chokes Frank on some of his options. He'll go into his turn with just 3 mana. And he's going to have to cast the top to really do anything in the first place. So really just 2 mana from there.
I'm not sure what card he was trying to deny Frank. Certainly taking away his mana does it, though. The draw for Frank is that Divining Top again, but with 2 life points and so little mana.
With the pace that this game is going and the pace that Miracles usually wins at, these players are 20 minutes deep into the round.
Yeah. Well, Frank's trying to hit a Terminus off the top, is my guess is here. That's the only card which that threat will stop Jay from activating Factory.
I don't think he has enough going on otherwise, though. There's 2 Spirit tokens, which are lethal in conjunction, the Factory that's lethal on top of that, and the other half of the Lingering Souls that he still hasn't flashed back. Jay just making sure he has this all locked up here. Frank currently knows that the top card of his deck is that counterbalance. So he'll have to shuffle away before he can really do anything effective. He could just spin the top first as well. It's not going to be very effective, though. He has to activate the Scalding Tarn to actually get access to those cards.
Swing for 2 in the air. Frank fetches down to 1. Needs to find Terminus on top of the deck to survive. Or in the top 3.
And survive is exactly right.
It's, yeah.
Jay peeled a Wasteland here as well, so Frank will be going down to 2 mana sources.
Yeah, he would flash back the Lingering Souls, do it again next turn.
Yeah, this is a great window to concede if I ever saw one.
Top 3, did he find a Terminus? No. On to game 2. Pox in the hands of Jay Imperiale takes the first game.
Pox not a terribly popular legacy deck, but
no.
It is able to squeak out these edges. It has a lot of ways to generate both virtual and literal card advantage.
So going over to the sideboards, I want to start with Jay's sideboard, as he's the Pox player here, not a deck we're terribly familiar with. 3 copies of Containment Priest, that would be for something like Sneak and Show. 3 copies of Extirpate. Not Surgical Extraction, Extirpate. 2 Abrupt Decays, 2 Collective Brutality, 2 Dread of Night, 2 Engineered Explosives, and then the 4th copy of Contamination.
Contamination is a reasonable one here. It's going to make it really difficult for Frank to play the game. Abrupt Decays, they can solve the counterbalance problem. Jay's deck's pretty well insulated against that in the first place, but it's reasonable to bring in if you have it. There's some argument for Dread of Night if you know that your Miracles opponent is just on Monastery Mentor and they're not on Entreat the Angels. That would stop any of the tokens from ever getting off the ground. So that's a reasonable option to have access to as well. It does kill his own Lingering Souls, which is a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, I mean, he wants to have some number of answers, I would think, to counterbalance, but I don't know how many. I mean, because the one thing that strikes me as the dangerous part of the Pox deck is he has very little card advantage. So he really needs to, like, he can't, there's a risk of boarding in cards that could be dead, and that's a very real concern.
Right. It is nice that the Abrupt Decay does just solve Monastery Mentor, and Skarren is just on Mentors. Yeah, there's no Entreat the Angels hanging out here. Over on Skarren's side, 3 Pyroblast, 2 Surgical Extractions, 2 Wear Tear, 2 Flusterstorm, a Red Elemental Blast, a Snapcaster Mage, a Vendilion Click, a From the Ashes, and a Gideon Ally as Zendikar. There's a reasonable argument for Gideon against this deck. Getting to 4 mana could be tricky against small Pox, but it's just a way to have a permanent on the battlefield that continually generates value. The Surgicals on his side, they make a good amount of sense to deal with those Bloodghasts, stuff like that.
Well, because that's the card advantage out of Pox. It's not, you know, they're not draw spells, it's recurrent creatures.
Wear Tear to deal with Bitter Blossom or Contamination seems mighty fine.
How do you feel about something like Gideon Ally of Zendikar? One thing I've seen against the Pox deck, if you ever resolve Jace the Mind Sculptor against it, the game's done.
Certainly on the play, I think more permanence like that makes sense. Getting to 4 mana can be problematic, but the card's very good on the battlefield.
Yeah, right. That's the concern about Pox, is that if they get up to any 4 mana spell, it's this deck doesn't have much play against Jace. I assume it doesn't have much play against Gideon either. All right, well, they're gonna get ready for a second game here. You got to keep an eye on that clock. This is a grind. This matchup can go a long time.
Yeah.
So we are now we talked about some spoilers. We are 2 weeks away from the Amonkhet pre-release, and that also means we are 2 weeks away from you getting to have a chance at the Amonkhet Sphinx playmat. That's being given away at the Star City Games Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia, and at pre-releases all around the country. So you can get this at participating stores. You can find participating stores near you at starcitygames.com/pre-release.
I really like the style guide for Amonkhet. A lot of cool stuff happening. Pretty excited for the aesthetic of this set. Coming off the back of Kaladesh, too. I think a lot of sweet new planes that we're exploring right now.
Frank can be back on the play here. Countertop, if he can get it down early enough, is pretty significant in this matchup. I think if he's on the play, it doesn't help him from once he's locked out, he's locked.
If you can get countertop on the play and actually stop Jay from resolving Liliana of the Veil or Pox on critical turns, then it's very significant.
Once again, it seems like the card that Frank wants to see the most is Sensei's Divining Top. I know that's true in most matchups, and here it is, turn 1.
Yeah, Sensei's Divining Top is really the glue for the Miracles deck.
Go over to Jay's side. He's going to start on an Inquisition of Kozilek. We'll take a look at Frank's hand. We see Flusterstorm, Monastery Mentor, look, Surgical Extraction, Snapcaster Mage, and a second land.
So the decision here really boils down to the leftovers in Jay's hand. It's a reasonable argument for taking the Flusterstorm or something that he really wants to resolve on turn 2, say a Smallpox. The Monastery Mentor is how Frank actually wins games. But if Jay's able to greenlight a Smallpox, maybe he has a second copy, he can make that a very unrealistic goal for Frank to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, the concern here is that Smallpox is a really powerful card, but you need to be ahead when you cast it. What Jay doesn't want to do is start trading cards and permanents with Frank while Frank has a top in play. That's kind of the Miracles. That's playing Frank's game for him. And it looks like he's going for Snapcaster Mage. Maybe on power level, if this game's going to be just about trading, that is certainly the most powerful card in Frank's hand. And
looks like Jay has access to multiple Edict effects, both a Smallpox and a Liliana of the Veil in hand. He can try to navigate in the game in a way where he catches Frank casting the Mentor, but not being able to make a Monk token on the same turn cycle.
Yeah, and you see Frank just kind of, and you'll see people do this a lot against land destruction decks. Spinning top during upkeep basically just wants to keep hitting land drops, and if he does, that should be fine.
Also against a discard heavy deck, floating your good spells on the top of your library makes a lot of sense as well.
Rearranges here, looks like Frank is going to just draw a land. Yeah, basic island, that'll be his play. So by playing island instead of the fetch land, it lets Frank spin on the top on end step. It does let Jay know that that was his draw. It might be back to the Thought Seizing. This time the card Thought Seize proper. A Flusterstorm from Frank will counter it. Urborg and another Thought Seize. Monster Mentor and Surgical Extraction. Now, one of the cards left in Jay's hand is a copy of Entomb, and it might be that this whole plan of turn 1 taking the Snapcaster Mage, this was all a setup to get the Surgical out of Frank's hand. I'm interested to see what he goes for. You know, by taking Mentor, Frank's hand doesn't do anything. It's just lands in a top. And that's what he's going to take.
Well, Jay also just has this Liliana of the Veil. He can force the issue on that Surgical if enough turns pass. He's able to get that on the battlefield.
If he takes all of Frank's real cards, just plays Liliana, casts Smallpox, eventually Frank will have to discard the Surgical before Entomb happens. Upkeep, Frank spins top again. His hand is just Surgical Extraction at the moment, and a land.
Surgical, not terribly impressive against these 1-mana targeted discard spells. Certainly when 2 Thoughtseize have already been cast.
It's something you want to have in your list because it's so important to Surgical a Bloodghast. You see Frank just plays another land, says go. And now we see Liliana of the Veil again from Jay. This is the card that more or less won him the last game.
And Jay tagged both the threats out of Frank's hand. He doesn't have access to that Snapcaster Mage anymore, that Mentor. It's going to be really difficult to pressure the loyalty of this Liliana.
Yeah, Frank's going to have to try to find something like Council's Judgment on top of his deck, and he's going to need to do it quickly. Jay's hand is 3 cards left. It's got both a Smallpox and a Entomb in it.
Players who have signed up for the 1 p.m.
Frank spins top. Swords to Plowshares and Terminus both in the top cards. They're good removal, but not thinking that's what he wants right now. Frank discards the Surgical, and Jay discards a second copy of Liliana.
That more or less turns on the Entomb in Jay's hand.
And Frank's going to get a fresh set of 3 here on end step. Cracks the fetch land. He's going to look for a way to take care of that Planeswalker. Or maybe, if he can find a Jace or Gideon of his own, draw it and slam it. His last card is a land.
Yeah, 4-mana Planeswalker here would be really nice. Jace matches up pretty well against Liliana of the Val. He will still need to find a way to actually get it off the table or pressure its loyalty, but he gets to draw extra cards, hide his good spells on top of his deck.
Well, Gideon would be fantastic here.
Oh yeah, just making 2/2s.
Which, yeah. And there is a Jace and Gideon on top for Frank. He can pick which 4-mana walker he wants. I believe that last card is a land. If it's a fetch land, he has to pick between the two. I'm interested to see which one Frank goes for. They both seem great. And it is. So here's the fetch land. He has to fetch. Oh, wait.
Taps
There's
for
an
black.
Urborg in play. He can have them both.
Goes for the one that's going to pressure
Wow.
Liliana first.
Yeah, Gideon.
Followed this up with Jace. This is a really good position for Frank.
And this is the danger of the Black Prison deck, is that it is very weak against the resolved 4-mana walkers, whether it's Gideon or Jace. It's just a nightmare for the deck to get them off the table.
Yeah, Liliana's -2, not terribly effective against a stream of tokens.
Well, there aren't cards, you know, sometimes we've seen, even when Reduke has played Pox, like a one of Heroes Downfall in the deck, which, yeah, it's kind of an expensive rate for Legacy, but it really shows the weakness of it. Sometimes you'll see a Pox player play something like Pithing Needle to deal with these. But yeah, look at his hand. Small Pox, and Tomb. It's just,
Hey, Needle and Downfall, they'd be nice, but Jay's actually kind of behind both Gideon and Jace.
Yes.
Frank's just going to have access to both of them.
It's very hard for his deck to beat these resolved walkers.
Jay can cast a Smallpox here, which will turn Frank off of 4 mana, but he already has the Gideon on the table.
Right. He'll plus the Gideon, kill Liliana. It gets bad from here. Or he'll make 2/2s. It doesn't even matter. They're both good.
Right. As long as he doesn't just emblem here.
I think the line he's going to play for is to Entomb Lingering Souls. It's not good. In that, I mean, it is good. It's the right play. It's not likely to win.
It's what his deck is able to do.
Yeah. It gives him a way to pressure Planeswalkers. Cast the main phase Entomb. Looks like it is a copy of Lingering Souls. You know, in theory, these 1/1 flyers could take care of Gideon.
Well, the strategy of Jay's deck is all about taking your opponents off of resources and then winning the game with these anemic threats. He has, Lingering Souls, Bloodghast, not terribly impressive cards, and he's not able to produce them at a very efficient rate either. He's just kind of casting all of these spells, entombing for a fair, here's a pair of 1/1 flyers. Whereas Frank is just casting two of the best Planeswalkers of Legacy.
He did just play the card like Midnight Haunting main phase go.
Yeah.
It's not, on rate, that's not particularly good.
Right.
It's 2 power flyer for 3. And on rate, it certainly is nowhere near as good as this Jace the Mind Sculptor Frank's about to cast.
Right.
And I will see whether Jay is going to even keep playing this one. With 16 minutes remaining, I'm not surprised if they just go to 3. Frank's going to use the Jace -1 to take care of a token. Gideon. He's debating. Yeah, Gideon 0 makes a Night Ally.
With the Jace, he could literally choose one of the 3 modes he can activate at random. They're all pretty good here. With the Gideon, as long as he doesn't emblem.
Yeah, I was gonna say like is it right to make to attack or to make a 2/2? I'm like, I don't know. They probably both win. And you say with Jace, you're like, do you want to unsummon or Fate Seal or Brainstorm? I'm like, I don't know. They probably all win.
Given that the 1/1 just gets in front of the 5/5 Gideon and the Liliana down-ticked, so it's really easy to actually close that one out, and there's no threat of the ultimate. The 2/2, I do think, is the better play than making the 5/5 for the turn.
Right. I mean, Frank is very good here, and he made the right plays. He probably could have picked whatever mode he wanted.
Yeah, the Jace can just do whatever. And that's frequently true of Jace the Mind Sculptor. Like, this card is just very good on multiple fronts.
Jay's hand of 3 copies of Smallpox.
Yeah, those are not
the damage
too
is
exciting
done
here.
If Frank was on 3 lands and had these Planeswalkers in hand, they'd be fantastic.
Yes. And Jay is just hanging on to those small pox to discard later. And it won't take Frank very long to actually close this game from here either. Jay doesn't really have cards in his deck that come back from a stream of 2/2 tokens. He doesn't really have answers to Planeswalkers either. Frank just brainstorming with his Jace, because whatever. All 3 modes play. Got a Swords to Plowshares in hand, so can deal with that Spirit token.
Counterbalance now joins Sensei's Divining Top. Ally attacks Liliana down to 1. Gideon makes another ally. And all right, the Jace is gone, or not, or the last card in Frank's hand is Swords. Yeah, and we're gonna go to a 3rd game. So Frank Skarren evens things up post board, and there was a window there where you weren't sure if it was gonna happen. Frank on end step cracked he had 3 lands in play. The 4th land was his last card in hand. Cracks the fetch land, spins top, and he needs to really, I think, find a 4-mana Planeswalker that turn. Jay's hand was just a fist of smallpoxes. If Frank doesn't land a Planeswalker there, I don't know if he'll ever get the chance to.
And finding both just made the game impossible for Jay. It's not clear that Jay could have beaten either of those Planeswalkers on their own. The combination of the two was certainly insurmountable.
Right. So we're going to look at the players. They're going to get ready for what I imagine will be a quick sideboard before their game 3. And what I'm noticing here in Jay's deck is he doesn't even really have cards that can answer an on-board Planeswalker. Not in his main deck, not in his sideboard. And possibly, like, at the game, he's planning to fight the game before we reach that point.
It'll be easier for him to execute on the play. He did die with a bunch of small pox in his hand at the end of the game there. If he's casting those and actually stone raining Frank, it's very difficult to get these 4-mana Planeswalkers onto the battlefield. Though on the dry there, the way that the game played out, where he wanted to get that Liliana into the Veil, and it did make sense to cast a Liliana when he did, but then he just found himself behind 2 Planeswalkers with multiple small pox in his hand.
All right, so over at StarCityGames.com, we talked earlier about our game night, and we do have some of our select game night creature collection creatures now available on playmats, sleeves, and in player bundles, including the promotion, the token for this month. That's the Fleece Keeper, your 0/1 sheep or soldier, cleric.
Who knows? It's very possible that card does not even have the proper creature type on it.
It's Summon Peacekeeper. But anyway, you can summon him to your playmat. This is available on the store now, illustrated by Andrea Radek over at StarCityGames.com. Game number 3. Jay starts with a turn 1. I thought it was going to be a Thoughtseize, but here we're doing a different style plan. This is a turn 1 Entomb. Last time Entombed, he got Nether Spirit. Looks like that's going to be true this time as well.
The gift that keeps giving. Not that Nether Spirit really has an avenue to enter the graveyard out of Skarren's deck. He's going to exile it, put it at the bottom of Jay's deck, or get beaten up. Those are his 3 options.
I guess Frank could surgically extract it.
Yeah.
We'll see. Frank starting off. He's had Divining Top the last 2 games. It's been his best weapon. See if he can produce a Divining Top for the 3rd game.
The point is destroy, not really a weapon in Frank's arsenal.
No, we mentioned before, all his removal exiles. It's going to be a turn 1 Ponder. No top right now for Frank. He does have Counterbalance and Monastery Mentor in hand. See, Surgical Extraction is in his top 3. See if he's just going to take that one and get the Nether Spirit gone.
If one
right
more
away.
card there is reasonable, that Surgical is certainly inviting.
Yeah, now the question will be, how is his land count? Can he, if he takes the Surgical?
If he already has the Swords to Plowshares, the Surgical is not very exciting as well.
Yeah, he's got a 2nd land in hand, but no more. And there's no lands in that top 3 either. But looks like he's going to keep it anyway and draw the Surgical. And he'll take care of Nether Spirit. Take that, Entomb. There are no Nether Spirits in Jay's hand. But there is a Bitter Blossom on turn 2 and a turn 3 Liliana. There's a lot to like.
And that Wasteland is, Frank only has Basic Island now, but I believe his second land is a dual land. It's a Tundra, so that Wasteland can push Frank back on resolving things like 4-mana Planeswalkers, Monastery Mentors.
And if Frank kept a hand that was light on lands and a light Ponder, this is not what he wants to see.
There's a reason you don't have anything similar to Wasteland in Modern. this land can really end a lot of games very quickly.
Well, so Jay will get a turn 2 Bitter Blossom. Frank will get a counterbalance. Interested to see what the top 3 Frank actually kept was. Here's the Bitter Blossom from Jay. And Frank has Force of Will for it. He'll pitch the counterbalance. His hand has Tundra, Gideon. So there's the win con.
Jay picked up another Entomb for his turn. That one's kind of medium.
Snapcaster Mage, the draw for Frank. That one's going to be pretty good here. Can get that Surgical in case Jay tries to do work with Bloodghast. Liliana, and he drawn by Jay, and he'll cast Liliana. So he's got to watch out. If his Bloodghasts get Surgical, winning starts to become very difficult.
Is kind of looking at his second Bitter Blossom and his Bloodghasts from that point. He does have one Sorin Lord of Innistrad in his deck.
A +1. Each player discards. Jay discards Bloodghast, and Frank end step is going to Surgical the Bloodghasts. So,
yikes.
Now, what are we looking at for ways to deal
Lingering Souls
damage? He's damage cards in Jay's deck. He's got 3 Lingering Souls, 1 Bitter Blossom, and 2 Mishra's Factory, and that's it.
The clock
I guess Sorin, Lord of Innistrad.
The clock is fast becoming both players' opponent.
Well, but if you take all the threats out of Jay's deck, I mean, eventually Frank's going to draw enough lands for a Gideon, right? But can Frank produce lands? He'll attack Liliana down to 2. And no land, that's pretty big. Draws a 3rd copy of Liliana for Jay. It's
so
a little
previously
much.
It was a little dicey about using this Liliana to Edict the Snapcaster and casting a second. I suppose given that he has just Entomb for Lingering Souls, he doesn't even need to make that line. He just has these backup Lilianas.
He is going to cast, Jay will cast Entomb. It will be for Lingering Souls.
So now he gets to discard second Liliana and still have 3rd Liliana on the following turn if he wants access to that.
I guess he doesn't have to fire off Wasteland immediately. He needs to stop Frank from getting to 4 mana, but 3 is okay.
He's currently covered against Monastery Mentor because he can just Edict it with the Liliana.
Yeah, so he flashes back the Lingering Souls, makes a pair of 1/1s plus his Liliana. Jay will discard one of his own Lilianas, and Frank discards a Terminus. We say go. These 1/1s can block for the Planeswalker if they need to. I'm not even sure that Jay will make that play. Land 3 for Frank, and it gets Monastery Mentor into play. He says go. Jay does have it covered, but then he doesn't get to Wasteland, not unless he draws a land here.
Land here would be really nice for Jay.
Cabal Therapy. Well, that's pretty nice too. A Liliana -2, Frank discards Snapcaster Mage. Liliana again takes care of the Monastery Mentor. Token swing. Big, big turn here for Frank. He's got a Gideon as his last card in hand. He needs a land off the top.
Even so, those two Spirit tokens for Jay make Gideon not necessarily game over.
Frank misses, but he draws Brainstorm. Land, Monastery Mentor. 1 more. Frank's down to 12 also.
He can keep land Mentor and cast Mentor this turn and hope the top of his deck is kind to him.
Well, his land's a fetch land. Yeah, so you'd have to, you're right, he can't like do that and then set up Gideon or anything. But you're right, with land Mentor, there's no, it's going to take Jay a couple turns to deal with that. And Frank's got to cast it now. He's about to lose his white mana source to Wasteland, unless he keeps that fetch. Looks like he's going to go for Sensei's Divining Top. He's going for a longer game, plays the land and says go. So Gideon, I believe, then the top card of his deck. Inquisition of Kozilek. That looks like something that you might discard. Jay's hand is just a bunch of discard spells. He will Wasteland away the Tundra. That takes away the Gideon out. Frank's going to spin top in response. Counterbalance, Monastery Mentor, Gideon are the top 3. Does he want either of them? I suppose Counterbalance isn't terrible here. He can cast it.
Well, the thing about the Mentor on the following turn is that Jay is going to have a Liliana at 2 loyalty, as opposed to on this turn, he'd only be going in, just going up to 2 right now. So, yeah, with this Wasteland happening, the Gideon...
Yeah, he doesn't have enough lands to do that. If he gets a 4th land, then he can do some neat tricks with the top and Mentor. But
Frank can throw a Hail Mary, draw a Gideon, crack fetch land, trade top.
Ooh, yeah, I see it. Frank's going to draw here as he went down to 10 on that attack. Cracks his fetch land, so likely going for...
He kept the Mentor. He can cast that here. That at least deals with the Liliana.
Yeah, Jay will have to -2 it.
And he has the top, and the top can help dig into a Terminus.
Yep, here's Monastery Mentor. And Jay has to -2, because if he doesn't, Frank just... He'll use the Divining Top to trigger Prowess and make monks. Draw is a Swamp. So Jay's hand does not do much. A swing for 2 puts Frank to 7. Liliana takes care of the Mentor. He'll play a Swamp, say go. Jay does not have much going on. His hand is an Inquisition of Kozilek, and he has a Cabal Therapy in the yard. Frank is going to try to use top to spin his way to victory. He's at 7.
There's a Swords to Plowshares in the top 3 here that deals with half of his problems.
Yeah, and that's probably good enough. He did that on upkeep, said go. Another land for Jay. That doesn't play much. Because, remember, Jay was surgically extracted twice here. So, yeah, he's got Frank down to 6, but he has so few real cards that he can draw.
Right.
Just says go. Frank spins top again. Land, land, land. Okay, well, one of them's a fetch land.
Right.
That'll reset. Draw that. It does cost him a life point. He'll spin top first to look 1 deeper. Land, land, land. Okay.
Yeah, we'll get rid of those ones.
He'll go to 5. Gets planes. You see Frank picking up the pace. 2 minutes, 30 seconds remaining. He's trying to find one of those walkers. He now has 4 lands in play. A Gideon or a Jace off the top is likely going to win the game. Though if it's Jace, actually, the clock might be his enemy. He really would like it to be Gideon.
Exactly. The Gideon is the one that might be able to win the game in time.
All right, he only has 1 of those, though. Spins top again. There is Gideon.
And Swords to Plowshares.
Beautiful. Rearranges those. A draw here from Jay. Frank attack. Frank's down to 4. 3 mana. It is Contamination.
Uh-oh.
And this was a huge draw from Jay. Okay, during your upkeep, sacrifice a creature or sacrifice Contamination. Well, okay, that's no good. But all the lands in the game now produce black. Without a Bloodghast, this card's actually pretty miserable.
Jay doesn't get to keep it for too long. We'll see what he has in hand. You know, that was his draw step for the turn, clearly. He's able to produce a Lingering Souls. He could still potentially close this game out.
Contamination is gone.
I just use it as a time walk here.
Swings puts Frank down to 3. It's a Swords on the 1/1. His hand is Inquisition of Kozilek and Thoughtseize, but that doesn't do anything, not against the top deck Gideon. Imagine Extirpate and Thoughtseize, but Frank quickly rearranges on end step, untaps, and here is the Planeswalker. Gideon, ally of Zendikar, makes a 2/2, says go. We saw it last game. There's not really an answer to this in Jay's deck. Plays a land and says go back. I guess Sorin, Lord of Innistrad, could theoretically answer this. And Frank's going to try to close out fast. He ups Gideon to a 5/5. It joins a 2/2 and swings 7. Jay's down to 15. Frank says go. More discard for Jay. When you're playing so many Thoughtseizes, Inquisitions, and Cabal Therapies, this is a risk you take.
I was looking at that Gideon was right on time.
And a Brainstorm from Frank. This should close things out. Council's Judgment and some lands. Off Brainstorm, Frank will put 2 back. Fetch land, ups Gideon again, swings 7, Jay's at 8. If this goes according to plan for Frank, they don't need to fight the clock. Inquisition. Snapcaster from Frank. targeting something. And Jay extends the hand. Frank Skarren with miracles off the back of Gideon Alev. Zendikar takes both sideboard games, and with it, he wins the match to improve to 3-0.